Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2019 Eleanor Clarke Slagle Lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome AOTA President Amy Lamb.
Welcome. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you all and celebrate the 63rd anniversary of the Eleanor Clarke Slagle Lecture. At the 1930 AOTA conference in New Orleans, 89 years ago, for those of you who are trying to do the math on that, a presiding official, in recognizing the tireless work of Eleanor Clarke Slagle, predicted that her name would stand out in history. Her place in history was cemented in 1954 with the establishment of the Eleanor Clarke Slagle Lectureship, so named to her honor her substantial contributions for the profession. As a founder, officer, and leader of the association, Mrs. Slagle commanded national and international renown as a speaker and consultant. As a person, she was described as possessing broad vision, charm, and dignity. Through the force of her personality and drive, she worked tirelessly to obtain recognition for occupational therapy and to establish high professional standards. Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of President Roosevelt, and Adolph Meyer, the distinguished psychiatrist, were among the guests paying tribute to Mrs. Slagle at a dinner in her honor in 1937. At that dinner, the association presented her with a gift that bore the inscription, "She has been the cornerstone in the development and promotion of occupational therapy." Through the years, all those selected to deliver the Eleanor Clarke Slagle Lecture have emulated the ideals of Mrs. Slagle and have continued to build on her cornerstone. So before meeting tonight's lecturer, please join me in recognizing and honoring some of our former lecturers who are present with us tonight. For the 2018 lecture, Dr. Gordon Giles. For the 2015 lecture, Dr. EllenCohn. For the 2013 lecture, Dr. Glenn Gillen. For the 2012 lecture, Dr. Karen Jacobs. For the 2010 lecture, Dr. Janice Burke. For the 2008 lecture, Dr. Wendy Coster. For the 2001 lecture, Dr. Winnie Dunn. For the 1986 lecture, Dr. Kitty Reed. And finally, for the 1980 lecture, Dr. Carolyn Baum. Thank you all for your many contributions to the scholarship of occupational therapy. Please welcome Dr. Sue Berger of Boston University, and Dr. Betty Crapo of the University of New Hampshire. They will be introducing Dr. Cohen this evening.
Thanks, Amy. That's yours.
It is a distinct honor to introduce Dr. EllenCohn for this year's Eleanor Clarke Slagle Lecture. Given Ellen's longstanding interest in fostering an understanding of others through the use of stories and storytelling, we decided to use a narrative approach to this introduction. I'm sure those of you who know Ellen will recognize the stories we tell and could add many others about her commitment, occupational nature, intense curiosity, and intentionality about absolutely everything. Ellen's commitment to the profession began early in her career through her leadership in fieldwork education, clinical reasoning, and collaboration. This commitment remains in all she does. For example, her husband mused that Ellen is so committed to student learning that she often writes more comments on papers than the students wrote themselves. Over the past 30 years, Ellen has reviewed virtually everything I have published with great insight and many, many comments, often written in purple. Our collaboration with Barb Schell on 2 editions of Willard and Spackman was influenced by Ellen's commitment to assuring that readers would see occupational therapy as a reflective, client-centered, theory-driven occupation and evidence-based practice. Whew. Now, commitment can be thought of as a serious endeavor, but it wasn't. For example, as we approach completion of the 10th edition, Ellen didn't understand Barb's metaphor that the horsers were coming to the barn. Subsequent emails from Ellen indicated that she could see the barn in the distance. She could see it, but not smell it. And finally, that the barn door was open for us to go through.
Ellen's understanding and belief in the importance of occupational performance permeates so much of who she is. She supports occupational performance in others in all situations. For example, during her extended family clam bake, she assures that all members participate in meaningful activities, from the young children who gather wildflowers and name the lobsters, to the teens who dig the fire pit and carry the firewood, to the adults who make the salad and supervise. Ellen is curious about just everything. Ellen could be sitting at a Starbucks or shopping at a mall. She is always observing, wondering, and living with her occupational therapy glasses on, trying to understand people's everyday occupations. She told a recent Boston University alum, "Don't ever stop noticing what's going around you. Always something to wonder." Ellen is also known to students and colleagues to be an information sponge, having knowledge of a wide range of subjects from multiple resources. As one student said, "Ellen is your personalized search engine." Finally, Ellen is intentional in everything she does and in every word she uses. She's careful not to use language such as aim for this or talk about the target when referring to goals, as she's aware of the gun language in those phrases. And whenever Ellen hears me say occupational therapy services, she tells me she thinks of mechanics servicing cars, not occupational therapists helping people. She is always alert to phrasing which does not effectively honor the individual or groups. Ellen is really thoughtful about her every word. My guess is she labored over each word that she shares with us tonight. We are thrilled to welcome our friend and colleague, the confident and competent Dr. EllenCohn.
Thank you, Sue and Betty. Stand up and face them. Don't hang back. Eleanor Clarke Slagel spoke these words almost 100 years ago. She was mentoring a young therapist who was presenting at the New York Institute for Occupational Therapists. Stand up and face them. Don't hang back. What's the message Slagel conveyed? I fantasized about having a conversation with her and the wisdom she would impart. I believe Mrs. Slagel was encouraging this therapist to be bold, to be persuasive, and to assert her competence with confidence. I imagine that she was reminding the therapist that what she had to say mattered. Kitty Reed, a scholar of occupational therapy history, reports that Mrs. Slagel was persistent and she had courage. She was deeply committed to promoting the value of occupational therapy. Just over 50 years later, Mary Riley, in her 1961 Slagle Lecture, asserted the often quoted proposition, occupational therapy is one of the great ideas of the 20th century. Just last year, AOTA President Amy Lamb noted in her presidential address that we hold on to a self-limiting belief that no one knows what occupational therapy is. On a global level, at the 2018 World Federation Conference in South Africa, we heard a similar message from Eliwani Ramagundo, who spoke of her dream that people throughout the world would know what occupational therapy is. Although we have made great strides, awareness of our profession remains uncertain. The responsibility to increase awareness of our profession belongs to us. As occupational therapy practitioners, we understand the values of narratives and listening for stories. For it is through storytelling that we convey the meaning of our experiences. In this lecture today, I propose that a grand narrative has permeated the first century of our profession. Following the basic narrative structure proposed by the great philosopher Hegel, the grand narrative of occupational therapy is familiar. The thesis is occupational therapy practitioners are incredibly competent. And the antithesis is occupational therapy practitioners are not confident. And the synthesis, the potential of occupational therapy, is not fully realized. In the spirit of story making and rewriting our narrative, the goal of this lecture is to envision what is possible if we demonstrate our competence with confidence. I approach this goal by asking a series of questions and then sharing the story of a competent and confident occupational therapist who, like Slagel, 100 years ago herself, worked in psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. So let's start with the question of why uncertainty about occupational therapy persists. The obvious challenge is the concept of occupation. One reason occupational therapy is not understood is because occupation is simultaneously incredibly complex and elegantly simple. Most people think of occupation as a job or having to do with work. I'm not proposing that we change our name. Rather, I propose that our strength is situated in our commitment to engagement in meaningful occupation and how what we do helps clients achieve that engagement. Our focus on occupation is essential to the lives of our clients and essential to our competence. Occupations, all the things we do throughout our day, are simple and full of complexity, ordinary, extraordinary, and saturated with meaning. In a chapter titled Valuing the Ordinary, Linda Fleury quoted the French philosopher de Chardin, suggesting that he was describing occupational therapy when he wrote, "What matters is not to do remarkable things, but to do ordinary things with conviction that their value is so enormous." In other words, we must value the ordinary. Although Fleury suggested that de Chardin's quote was relevant to the profession, it's also relevant to the construct of occupation. What may appear as ordinary occupations to some, such as eating or grooming, take on new, extraordinary meaning if there are disruptions in one's daily life. Often, the meanings of occupations are unspoken or tacit, taken for granted, and we only come to appreciate them when they no longer feel possible. So, to make this concept clear, we must understand that when we enable others to do the ordinary that they can't do without occupational therapy intervention, we are doing the extraordinary. As conceptualized by Betty Hassakis in her 2006 Slagle address, everyday occupation is the primary means by which we organize the world in which we live. The intermesh patterns of ordinary occupations are what give shape to our daily lives. Geographer Graham Rolls explained that we tend to develop a regular time, space, rhythm, and routine in the use of the physical environment that becomes taken for granted and subconscious as our body adapts to the setting. For example, we develop regular routines for walking down the street to catch the bus. Yet, occupations can have deep meaning when they happen less frequently, such as a new achievement like learning to ride a bike, or a cultural rite of passage, such as a baptism or a quinceañera. They can also be simultaneously routine and special, as in the example of using a favorite tea set passed down through the generations of the family to drink tea every afternoon. We all know the meanings of occupations can change over time and across contexts as meaning unfolds throughout life. For example, cooking a meal for a family for a special occasion is very different than the daily routine of cooking dinner for one's family after a busy day at work. Cooking may be considered work for the chef in a restaurant. For others, cooking may be a leisure occupation, as it is for my sister who enjoys decorating cakes. A dear friend enjoys cooking for the church supper in her community and considers cooking as a form of volunteering and community service. These examples illustrate that the meaning of our occupations are personally constructed and constantly changing. We can observe people cooking, but the meaning associated with the occupation of cooking is hidden and often unarticulated. How we experience occupation is interconnected with the environment, sometimes called context, in which we live. Our occupational therapy theoretical frameworks are informed by a transactional view of the relationships between people, occupations, and environments. Different environments shape our lives in different ways. In this view, environments are not just containers for occupations, rather our engagement in occupations is always situated, supported, and restricted by the physical, sociocultural, economic, temporal, institutional, and political environments. Using our occupational therapy perspectives, we consider all these features of the environment in supporting engagement in occupation. Sometimes we advocate for change to the physical environment, and sometimes we advocate for change, for social change. For example, when we partner with adults with mental illness to design an anti-stigma campaign in their community. Our concerns are related to doing daily occupation, real-world function or performance, objective phenomena that are performance-based and measurable. For example, how we complete a particular task. As Wendy Koster pointed out in her 2008 Slagle Lecture, our concerns are also subjective, personally constructed, unique to every person, and harder to measure. These concerns include phenomena such as meaning, quality of life, belonging, and inclusion. When we attend to these concerns, we address what truly matters to clients. Here are 4 stories that represent the diversity of meaningful occupations and the diversity of valued outcomes. The O'Reilly family collaborates with an occupational therapist in the NICU to monitor the impact of sensory stimuli on their premature newborn and plan for the transition home. For the O'Reillys, parenting their infant is a meaningful occupation. At age 26, Bruce returns from a tour of duty in a war zone. Following hand surgery, in collaboration with an occupational therapy assistant, they figure out a way to adapt his fishing rod to accommodate for his left-handed weakness. For Bruce, fishing is a meaningful occupation. The Russell family visits the Science Museum with Liam, their 6-year-old son who has autism. To support Liam's visit, they use a wayfinding map that describes the activity demands and sensory stimuli at each exhibit. An occupational therapist developed this resource. For the Russell family, the subjective feeling of inclusion and belonging at the museum is meaningful occupation. In collaboration with an occupational therapist, George, a 60-year-old man with a history of mental illness, develops a routine for getting enough sleep and organizing his unstructured time that supports his volunteerism for environmental causes and perceived quality of life. For George, being able to give to others is a meaningful occupation. Parenting an infant, fishing, feeling welcomed at a museum, and volunteering are uniquely valued outcomes of occupational therapy. Because these occupations are so diverse and ordinary, it's challenging to explain precisely what we do that is extraordinary. And I argue this challenge has led to a lack of confidence. We must learn to explain how we achieve the extraordinary. In doing this, we refuse to hold back, demonstrate confidence, and improve the ability of others to understand our profession. Two papers, both written about 25 years ago, have greatly influenced my thinking about our profession. Mary Ramdowski's 1995 paper titled, "There's More to Life Than Putting on Your Pants," is one of my all-time favorites titles of an AJOP paper. Where would you be without your pants? Of course, putting on your pants is important, but for the occupational therapy practitioner, addressing the relationship between putting on your pants and quality of life is what is most important. Occupational therapy is more than skill development. We focus on the subjective and objective. That is, clients' satisfaction with engagement in meaning and value occupations. If we only focus on the skill of putting on your pants, we miss an opportunity to trumpet the value of how being able to put on your pants connects to enabling people to engage in meaningful occupations. In the late 1980s, I had the honor of working with an anthropologist, Dr. Cheryl Mattingly, on the AOTA-AOTF clinical reasoning study of occupational therapists. We discovered a phenomena that has stayed with me all these years. We observed that therapists confronted an ongoing professional dilemma related to their commitment to engagement in meaningful occupation. We called the response to this dilemma the underground practice. Because our interventions may appear to be difficult to measure in objective and reimbursable terms, especially in the medical context, we tend to overemphasize the objective and document outcomes that comply with reimbursement guidelines. For example, we document outcomes related to the sequencing of tasks or level of assistance required for dressing. The outcomes our clients value, such as fishing or volunteering, are not documented in the charts and remain underground. This ongoing dilemma between occupational therapy that truly matters to clients and what is reimbursable has interfered with our confidence in proclaiming the full scope of our practice. This dilemma is the antithesis to our competence narrative. The good news is that ideas about health and reimbursement have changed since then, and I argue today that we are now well prepared and positioned to embrace the power of meaningful occupation as a strength, as an asset to our profession. Once again, our focus on occupation is essential to the lives of our clients and essential to our competence. We must communicate that we support people to engage in the everyday occupations that give their lives meaning. We must communicate this focus to others with competence and confidence. We must clearly describe how we create the extraordinary out of the ordinary. Now, let's consider the constructs of competence and confidence and why we need both to affirm the value of occupation. So we ask, what is competence? Exploring the etymology or origins of words is another form of understanding meaning. That is the meaning of words. The word competence comes from the late Latin word competire, which means to strive after something in company with. I find this etymology fascinating because it highlights what it means to be a competent occupational therapy practitioner. Our competence is rooted in our commitment to collaboration. That is, to meet and strive after something together with our clients to understand the significance of events and relationships in their lives. Effective therapy requires an understanding of the meaning of occupations to our clients and helping our clients recognize what is meaningful to them. As Mary Lawler eloquently stated, Collaboration involves complex interpretive acts in which the practitioner must understand the meanings of the interventions, the meanings of the illness or disability in a person and family's life, and the feeling that accompanies these experiences. Our competence is rooted in this relational work of listening and communicating with clients. In current times, we define competence as the ability to perform a specific task in a manner that yields desirable outcomes. In our professional roles, we acquire competence over time as our ability to apply knowledge, skills, and abilities successfully to new and familiar situations evolves. Competence is viewed as a practitioner's ability to provide quality intervention and to do their job. As stated in the beginning of this lecture, the thesis of our grand narrative is that we are competent, regardless of the definition we adopt. Society's views about health are becoming more congruent with the long-standing ideals of occupational therapy. The current reforms to the U.S. healthcare system that emphasize value-based care provide an opportunity for the profession to highlight our competence. Healthcare and rehabilitation now value well-being, function, and participation in desired context. Aspects of human performance that have always been the constant focus of occupational therapy. Patient or client-centered practice and patient-reported outcomes have also gained considerable attention in assessing the value of healthcare. Patient-centeredness, or attending to what matters to patients, is now valued and viewed as both an outcome and a means to improve health. Healthcare payment reform initiatives to improve quality are tied to measures and indicators of patient-centeredness as critical outcomes of quality. Providing care that is respectful of and responsive to patient preferences has been a long-standing hallmark of occupational therapy. We are competent in patient-centered care. These shifting views provide us with an opportunity to demonstrate our competence, and we now have a mechanism to do so. Thanks to the advocacy efforts of the AOTA Public Affairs Department, in physical medicine and rehabilitation settings, occupational therapy evaluation and reevaluation CPT codes for reimbursement now require the inclusion of an occupational profile. Consistent use of the occupational profile enables us to demonstrate our commitment to patients as collaborators in the therapy process and facilitates patient-centered care. The Improving Medicare Post-Acute Care Transformation Act of 2014 is another example of a healthcare evolution that aligns with occupational therapy values. In the past, we've measured intervention by volume in the form of hours, minutes, or days in therapy. We have moved to value-based models in which payment is driven by quality. Function has become the foundation for defining quality and value. Function relates not only to physical function, but to cognitive and psychosocial function as well. Function has always been at the center of occupational therapy. Although I would argue that occupational therapy outcomes go beyond function, remember, it's not just about putting on your pants. We now have compelling and rigorous scientific evidence and cost-effectiveness data to provide support for our competence to address our healthcare system's greatest needs for people throughout their life course. Health policy researchers Rogers and colleagues recently analyzed associations between Medicare claims and cost data with spending and readmission rates. The researchers noted investing in occupational therapy has the potential to improve care quality without significantly increasing overall hospital spending. Occupational therapy was the only spending category where additional spending had a statistically significant association with lower admission rates for patients with heart failure, pneumonia, and myocardial infarction. They reported that occupational therapy places a unique and immediate focus on patients' functional and social needs, which can be important drivers of readmission if left unaddressed. How great is this study? Just this fall, Stevens and Lee, researchers at the CDC, published a study demonstrating that addressing home hazards with the assistance of an occupational therapy practitioner could save our healthcare system over $400 million by reducing medically treated falls. 27 different studies document the benefits of the cognitive orientation to occupational performance approach. This task-oriented problem-solving approach that we call co-op enables people to be actively involved in solving their performance problems and achieving self-identified goals. Studies document the effectiveness of this intervention with children and with adults with a range of conditions. These examples are only a mere glimpse of the plethora of studies that support the range and depth of our competence as a profession. I reiterate my earlier point. Our competence and ability to excel have never been stronger. However, to realize the full potential of occupational therapy to benefit society, we also need confidence, as success correlates with both competence and confidence. So now we ask, what is confidence? While competence is a task-oriented and we measure our competence according to standards of a specific domain, confidence is a mindset, an abstraction of our own internal state. Once again, I start with the etymology of the word. Confidence comes from the Latin words con, expressing intense force, and fidere, trust. Together, the words mean firmly trusting, bold, or having full trust. This is what Eleanor Clarke Slagel asked us to do when she said, "Stand up and face them. Don't hang back." Today, to be confident means to have faith in our convictions, or stated another way, a trusting belief in our abilities. Confidence is the way we meet our circumstances. If we believe in our abilities, then we will be free to approach circumstances without self-doubt. However, confidence is not bravado, arrogance, or bluster. While confidence is related to self-efficacy or self-esteem, it's more than feeling good about ourselves. It's a wholeheartedness, or to use Slagel's words again, it's not holding back. Yes, confidence is a mindset, but it's also linked to doing an action. To quote Dr. Richard Petty, a psychologist who studies confidence, confidence is the stuff that turns thought into action. The view that confidence is about action follows a circular logic that we are all familiar with. If confidence is a belief in our success, which then stimulates action, we will be more confident when we take that action. While action seems to follow feeling, they really go together. By taking action to communicate the value of our profession, we can indirectly regulate our feeling. For example, our confidence in explaining the value of occupation to one person gives us the confidence to try something new, perhaps to take action to explain the value of occupational therapy to policymakers. Confidence also comes from striving to master a challenge. Learning to embrace struggles shows us that it is possible to make progress without being perfect on the first try. Just like a yoga master who practices poses, it takes repeated practice to develop confidence. That's why yoga is called a practice. Similarly, developing confidence as part of that practice is the result of that process. Conversely, a consequence of limited confidence is inaction. Often we wait till the stars are aligned, everything feels right, and we think we are fully ready. When we are unsure, we hold back. We hold back because we think others will not understand the focus of occupational therapy, or we fear that our work appears too simple and others may not value it. Lack of confidence leads to inaction. This logic helps us to see that seeking perfection actually inhibits confidence and keeps us from action. If we're constantly seeking that perfect description of occupation, we will never be fully confident because the bar will always be too high. When we embrace self-limiting attitudes, such as occupational therapy is too complex to explain, we close off possibilities. These doubts exist for all of us at certain points and in certain circumstances. Students, if you do not answer a question because you are not completely sure of the answer, you will never take the risk to build your confidence. However, if you take the risk, you will receive feedback. The feedback you receive, even if your performance is not perfect, helps you to improve for the next time. If you make corrections and try again, you can build confidence. So now we ask, what do competence and confidence have in common? Confidence is an essential life ingredient that has a complicated relationship with competence. Competence matters, but projecting confidence is equally as important when interacting with clients or promoting the profession. Professional confidence includes trust in our role as occupational therapy practitioners and faith in our scope of practice. Thus, our professional confidence can bolster our professional competence, our professional identity, and ability to communicate what we do. But overall, it's not a lack of competence that holds us back. Rather, it's our self-limiting perception. As Slagel said, we need to act instead of holding back. The synthesis component of our shared and grand narrative will enable us to envision a new narrative. And now we ask, what does it look like when we merge our competence and our confidence? To understand more clearly what happens when we do assert our competence and affirm the value of occupation with confidence, I interviewed the competent and confident therapist I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture. Caitlin Sinovac is a triple terrier. That means she has 3 degrees from Boston University, a baccalaureate degree in therapeutic studies, and a master's and post-professional degree in occupational therapy. Like the terrier mascot, Caitlin has courage and determination. Caitlin developed an evidence-based and theory-driven occupational therapy program within a primary care setting for people experiencing homelessness. She took a risk, she did not hang back, and I was really curious to hear her story. Like many students, Caitlin began her education with a desire to work with children, but Caitlin loved what her supervisor was doing at a day program for people with mental illness. The experience shifted Caitlin's career trajectory. Caitlin told me, my supervisor was engaged with the clients and problem-solving day-to-day things that are so important. She was helping the clients develop practical strategies to try something they thought they couldn't do. And now it's time for a shout out to all the fieldwork educators in this room who mentor our students. So thank you. You matter and you make a difference. When I asked Caitlin what drove her to develop a new program, she described her deep frustration while working in the inpatient setting. Many of the patients admitted to the hospital were experiencing homelessness. Once the patients were medically stable, discharge planning was difficult. Caitlin was disturbed that the best place for discharge was often a shelter without resources to support people to make a change. Caitlin believed that occupational therapy had something to offer these patients, if only she could provide services in the community. A social worker who had worked with Caitlin in the inpatient setting started a new job at a community primary care health center. The center included wraparound support services to address health and housing needs of people experiencing homelessness. Because the social worker had observed the occupational therapy services Caitlin provided in the inpatient setting, he understood the value of what we do. Caitlin and her social worker buddy got together and brainstormed possibilities for integrating occupational therapy into the health center. Just like Eleanor Clarke Slagel, years earlier at Johns Hopkins, Caitlin was persuasive. She took a risk. She convinced her boss to allow her to offer occupational therapy services on an outpatient basis. Planning her schedule to see these patients was risky because if the patients did not show up, she might not have met her productivity requirements for billable hours. Caitlin thought the risk was worth it because she had a trusting belief that access to occupational therapy was important to the health and well-being of patients. She viewed the risk in terms of equity and social justice. Working towards goals that come from your values builds confidence. Stepping out of your comfort zone also builds confidence. Caitlin was willing to step out of the comfort zone of reliable billable hours because she had a faith in her conviction that occupational therapy was valuable and that she had the necessary skills for the task. She did not have the whole program perfectly figured out, but she took a risk. That was 5 years ago. The program is now firmly established, and Caitlin is evaluating the program to demonstrate the effectiveness of occupational therapy within a community-based primary healthcare setting. Caitlin's confidence, her firm belief in the value of occupational therapy enabled her to use her competence to build a successful new program. Caitlin took another risk. She advocated for the very first patient referred to her, a 50-year-old man she called Doug. Not his real name, Doug was referred to occupational therapy to assess his potential to succeed in supportive housing. Doug had chronic medical needs, he had experienced a stroke, and he had a left-sided hemiplegia. He was drinking alcohol and living in a shelter. The staff at the shelter thought he needed more support than they could provide, but were worried that an assisted living facility or nursing home would not accept him because he was not ready to stop drinking. Furthermore, they did not think Doug could succeed in supportive housing. They did not see his possibilities, only his limitations. Caitlin told me that it was important to consider alternative ways about thinking about his potential. Caitlin collaborated with Doug, explored what was important to him, and learned that he aspired to safely take care of his daily hygiene and mealtime needs. He repeatedly said to her, "Caitlin, I just want to take a shower." Doug was unable to take a shower in the shelter because the residents were allocated only 10 minutes for a shower, there were no grab bars, and the dials were too far away to be reached while seated in a shower chair. Doug had to wash up at a sink. Caitlin believed that working together, she and Doug could brainstorm strategies to help Doug be safe in the shower and cook with a microwave in the supported housing complex. She helped him imagine new possibilities and then supported him as he practiced the strategies in the housing complex. After Doug mastered the shower, they moved on to managing his fixed SSI income so that he could save money for a TV. A few months later, Doug invited new friends to join him in his apartment to watch the football game. At first glance, Doug's occupations seem ordinary. Yet, with the guidance of an occupational therapy, Doug moved into supported housing, took care of his daily living needs, developed social networks, and lived his life with dignity. That's extraordinary. Just like Slagle did in her day, Caitlin helped Doug regain dignity by establishing basic habits of self-care and social behavior. Caitlin considered Doug's identity. She understood that supporting Doug to move to a new housing situation would bolster his image of himself as a self-sufficient person capable of self-management in his home. The value of occupational therapy was more than simply teaching Doug how to shower with one hand. The sum of achieving what we may consider ordinary occupations led to the extraordinary complex outcome of reconnecting him to a sense of humanity in his social world. So now we ask, what can we learn from Caitlin's story to help us communicate the value of occupational therapy? Numerous scholars have urged us to describe the distinct features and values of our profession. In his 1996 Slagle Lecture, David Nelson pressed us to take personal responsibility for explaining to the world why we are called occupational therapists. In 1977, the philosopher and physician Tristan Engelhardt recommended that we highlight our distinct focus on human occupation and quality of life. He eloquently noted the virtue of occupational therapy is engagement in the world. To communicate our competence and confidence, we must be able to demonstrate and explain the features of all occupational therapy intervention that we value and believe are essential to promote the desired change, as these concepts shape what we do. Caitlin's story highlights the essential features of all occupational therapy and the value of occupation as a therapeutic agent and a meaningful outcome. Collaboration with clients focused on occupations that matter is at the center of our interactions with all clients and essential to all occupational therapy. We value a respectful, collaborative partnership of mutual participation because effective therapy demands a high level of commitment from clients and practitioners. Caitlin explored what was important to Doug. They considered his goals and values and then brainstormed strategies together rather than Caitlin dictating goals and strategies to him. Caitlin's story also emphasizes an essential feature of occupational therapy that is so familiar to all of us. That is our transactional view that the person, the occupations, and the environments where they occur are inseparable. How these elements influence each other is a recurring question for all occupational therapy interventions. We systematically analyze what and how a person or groups of people actually engage in their occupations. You all know this. We conduct an occupational analysis, and this view of human behavior is an essential feature of all occupational therapy. This is why we call ourselves occupational therapists. We use this occupational analysis to help us define the barriers to engagement in occupation and where to intervene. Of course, we then use treatment theories to guide the intervention. Ultimately, these processes focus on supporting people to engage in the everyday occupations that give their lives meaning. And now, the last question. What can we do to support each other to affirm the value of occupation with confidence? We are competent, and our long-standing values are congruent with society's contemporary views about health. We have a strong and growing body of research evidence to demonstrate our value. We need to assert our competence to support our confidence. Like Caitlin, each of us needs to routinely demonstrate and share the complexity and value of our work. We can do so by communicating our propositions about how change typically works in occupational therapy. We all have examples of how some ordinary aspect of our work led to extraordinary outcomes. Engagement, connection to others, reestablishment of pride, improved quality of life, inclusion, or more cost-effective health care. Our task is to share these stories with confidence. It will take a village to confidently rewrite our grand narrative from nobody knows what we do to the virtue of occupational therapy is meaningful engagement in the world. And like Caitlin, we all have to feel confident in our ability to stand tall and take a risk. We need to assure that our clients and their families, our professional colleagues in other disciplines, our funders and policymakers all understand the virtue of occupational therapy. To communicate confidently the grand narrative of our competence, we need to be role models and mentors for each other. Role models show us what is possible, just as Caitlin did and her fieldwork supervisor did for her. We must reinforce our belief in the value of occupation and occupational therapy. to take chances, and to try something new. We need to show that it is possible to make progress without being perfect the first time. We know that taking on challenges and achieving success that are slightly beyond our comfort zone builds confidence. Socialization and professional identity formation begin to develop in our occupational therapy education programs. We can begin by designing learning opportunities that encourage and nurture students to venture into unknown territory. Learning experiences that encourage students to communicate the complexity of occupational therapy to people unfamiliar with the profession may provide a foundation for confidence. Assignments might include practicing with interprofessional students or advocating with legislators, and of course, reflecting on the learning experience. How many times has someone asked you, what's occupational therapy? Some of you may have a go-to answer. If you do not have one, let me invite you to develop a response that you might share with confidence. If you are an educator or a fieldwork educator, please help your students develop and refine their description of occupational therapy in a way that embraces and describes the mechanisms and value of occupation. I challenge you to reflect on how you describe occupational therapy to others and ask yourself if you include a focus on meaningful engagement in occupation. Similarly, if you're an experienced practitioner, consider how you might adopt your description for a specific audience. How would it sound if you described occupational therapy to a federal, state, or local policymaker? Might you revise your description if you were explaining occupational therapy to a new member of an intervention team? That new story, that new narrative must create an understanding that occupational therapy practitioners do the extraordinary to assure that every client succeeds at the ordinary. Confidence and competence come from understanding our distinct strengths and values. Our distinct strength is enabling people to engage in occupations that promote health and well-being. I have focused on two words throughout this talk, competence and confidence. Before I conclude, there's one more word to consider. That is commitment. When we enter our profession and become occupational therapy practitioners, we need to make a commitment to our clients, to ourselves, and to all we meet that our actions and our words will both maintain and extend our competence, particularly as we mentor and support each other. We all need to make a commitment to communicate our competence confidently as we explain the ordinary and extraordinary power of occupation. In doing so, we provide the best possible occupational therapy for clients and their families and advocate for the profession. I am so grateful for this extraordinary honor and privilege to honor Eleanor Clarke Slagel and engage in an ongoing reflection on our profession. I express my deep appreciation to my colleagues and friends who nominated me. Throughout my career, I have been pushed beyond my comfort zone and supported by clients, students, past and present, colleagues, mentor, teachers, and my family. Thank you all for stretching my thinking, and of course, my family. Your love and support sustains me and reminds me to be safe, make good decisions, and to have fun. And now, of course, The last words come from Eleanor Clarke Slagel herself. Don't hang back. I need water.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen, for your gift to those of us who heard you today and for your contribution to the profession that will guide us into the future. Somebody's supposed to photo?
Oh, there's the person. There's the person.
All right, thank you everyone for being here this evening and to share this very special tradition with us. Have a wonderful evening.